Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 100.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have a solo show for episode 100, where I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what parents of juniors should be doing right now. Now, I focused on the junior year because I think that's where a lot of families need to spend some time and effort. Now, if you happen to have a sophomore or freshman or even younger children, you don't necessarily need to just, quit here and move on. I would encourage you to listen anyway, especially if you're the type of parent that likes to learn ahead and know what's coming. So certainly if you have a sophomore or freshman, what you're going to learn here will kind of open your eyes and give you a little more running room to get ready. So if you're a parent of a junior, we're going to talk about the 4 key areas that you need to work on. We're going to talk about a scholarship plan, a visit plan, test plan, and financial plan. As always, a lot of great information is available in our show notes. So if you go to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/100, we're going to have the links for all the various resources that I talk about in this episode. And I would encourage you to plug into some of the tools available on our website as you learn more about the process of college planning. I appreciate you listening. And as always, if you want to leave us a review in iTunes, that would be appreciated as well. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this episode. All right, today I wanted to put together a quick outline and talk a little bit about what parents should be doing right now if you're the parents of a junior. So it's fall, and if you have a junior right now, what should you be doing in order to prepare for college? And the reason I wanted to talk about this is I've been working a lot in my office with parents one-on-one, and it seems like I have the same conversations over and over again. And I think parents really need to understand that the college planning process really starts, or should really start, early in the junior year, or perhaps even earlier than that. But what I found is there's kind of 4 key areas that families need to focus on first. And in the junior year is when a lot of this stuff needs to happen, or at least should happen. For a lot of families, it won't quite be done, and it'll bleed over to senior year. But we certainly want to get it done where we can. So the 4 key areas that families need to be working on is you need to have a test plan, a scholarship plan, a visit plan, and then finally a financial plan, or this college financial plan. So in other words, a plan about the finances of college. So I'm going to go through each of these and spend a few minutes talking them through because you really need to understand what we're talking about and how to kind of take the next steps forward. So let's start with the test plan. When I'm talking about a test plan, I'm talking about the ACT or SAT test, the test that students take in order to prepare and apply to colleges. Now, in the past, when I was young and going off to college, there wasn't a lot of preparation for the test. You essentially signed up for a test date, you went off, took the test, did the best you could, and that was that. Today, families are doing a lot more prep and planning around testing. And we could get into the philosophics of, well, does it make sense that everybody spends all this time worrying about a test, and therefore we spend a lot of time and money and effort on a test that we're going to submit once, and then we're going to move on, and we're never going to consider it again. And if we could get everybody in the world to agree that nobody's going to prep for the test, that would make it fair. And then, of course, we all could save the money, time, and effort. But the reality, of course, is everybody's looking for that edge. So a lot of people out there are prepping for the ACT or SAT. And if you're able to do that, in a lot of cases, you can score better. And if you're scoring better, then you have more and better opportunities, both for scholarships and admissions to a college you might be considering. So unfortunately, test planning is becoming a bigger deal, partly because that's what the competition is doing. So what are your options? Well, I guess first of all, you need to decide if you're going to take the SAT or the ACT. Now, I'm not the expert in the tests and understanding what your choices are. I would defer that to a test prep expert. Lauren and some of my previous podcasts would be a great example, and I'll put information on the previous podcasts in the show notes where we've talked a lot about ACT versus SAT, test prep, and all that information. So go back and listen to the episodes on test planning. But the gist of it, again, is if you're going to take the ACT or the SAT, are you going to take it once or twice? Are you going to take it 3 times? Are you going to do some prep in between? Are you going to do online course about testing? Are you going to hire a tutor and do a lot of one-on-one work? And it really depends on what your goals are. So your test plan kind of needs to tie in with your school selection. If you think you're pursuing high-end schools and you need to every point you can get on the test, well, then you may work at it harder than if you're going to go to the local state school or even the local community college where any decent score will do. You're in a kind of a different situation. So you need to assess how hard you're going to work on the test and what your goals are for the test. And again, people ask me, well, is it worth it to get your ACT test score up a point or your SAT up, 50 points or whatever it might be if you work at it? And the short answer is that the better score is always better. You won't know if it's going to make a difference, however, till the end of the process, or even then you may not know. So as an example, a college might say, well, we draw the line for admission this year with an ACT of 26, let's say. If you happen to have a 25, you're not going to get admitted. And had you known and worked a little harder and got to the 26, that may have made the difference. Unfortunately, most colleges aren't going to tell you where the lines are directly, especially for admission. Some will, but most of the time you don't know exactly where it's going to be. So I've had some families, come up just a little bit short and not realize it. Or maybe you just get over the line. So you're not going to know if you need that one more point, but if you can go get that extra point, you may as well go do it, all things being equal. Now you need to balance that with what else is going on in your student's life, because test prep, of course, is going to take the student's time. There's not a lot mom and dad can do to improve test scores other than perhaps pay for the tutoring or pay for the course. But the student needs to do the work. So the student needs to be on board as well. So if your son or daughter, is dragging their feet and not likely to spend a lot of time and effort pursuing the ACT and doing better, well, then that may dictate how much time and money you spend on it. However, there's a lot of motivated kids out there that are, have big dreams and are targeting certain schools, and they may need scores. We also see that in athletics. There's minimum test scores that you need in order to be eligible for Division I and Division II athletics. So you need to pay attention to that. So when we talk about test planning, first we need to figure out what our desires are. In other words, are we going to do a lot of testing, a lot of prep? Are we going to work really hard at it? And that decision may come as we start visiting schools and we start learning what's out there. And then the other part of the test planning is the logistics of it all. When are you going to take the tests? They're only offered 6 or 7 times a year, and there's very specific dates and registration requirements. And when you lay out your calendar, you may notice that there's only particular dates that work out well. I've had situations where families say, well, we can't do this test date because that's when the track meet is, or that's when an important football sectional game is, or something along those lines, where they're saying, we can't choose these dates, so we have to choose other dates. And so laying out your calendar and saying, well, when are we going to test? How often are we going to test? Are we going to prep in between? Are we going to take the first test with no prep at all? All those are big decisions that families need to start thinking about. And if you have a junior right now, your goal is to have a test score by the end of your junior year that is appropriate for what you need. What Lauren says, again, is a test score that you're proud of. I would say that that is part of the goal in the test planning. Let's tie into that the visit plan. So parallel with your testing, you're also going to be visiting colleges. So there's various types of visits out there, and you can obviously do what I would call the stealth visit, where you drive onto a campus, you get out, you look at the old buildings, you get back in the car, you drive away, nobody even knows you were there, and that's your visit. And that's maybe what you do with a freshman or a sophomore, or as part of your vacation where you don't have a lot of time. You're just going to drive through a campus quick and spend a half an hour. That's great. But at some point, you're going to want to do more in-depth visits. So now we start looking at a visit plan. So questions for the visit plan would be, how many schools do you feel you need to visit? Is it going to be 1 or 2? 5 or 10? Are they going to be local or far away? If a lot of your visits are going to include travel, then you're going to have to plan a little better and figure out, airfare or road trips or whatever it's going to be. And that can make visit planning a little more work. All right, so as we work through visit planning, I also have a lot of families that say things like, well, we don't know where to visit because we don't know what we're interested in. And I would argue the flip side of that is, well, you don't know what you're interested in because you haven't visited anything. So it's the cart before the horse kind of thing. Is you may have to do some visits just to get your feet wet. So if you have a student that's very undecided and you're not sure where to start, I would recommend you do a couple local visits. Find the local state school or the local private schools that are convenient. And if they're close to what you're looking for, great. If they're not, well, if they're convenient, use them anyway, right? So you might go find 2 or 3 colleges in your town, or if you're in a bigger city, certainly. And if you're in a smaller, you might have to drive to the nearest big city to find a couple colleges. But when you visit a couple colleges, that may help you narrow out what you're looking for. And maybe the first few visits are just an opportunity to see a large campus and a small campus, and an urban campus and a rural campus, and a large state school and a small private school, and get a feel for, what things you like and what things you don't like about each individual college. And what you'll find as you do visits is you'll start focusing in on, oh, this is what's important to me. And you'll start paying attention to those things more. Again, as an example, you go to a visit and you go to the large state school and they take you to the big stadium and say, this is where the football games happen. And your student looks at you and says, why are we here? I don't go to football games. I have no interest in football. I'm interested in, their museums. I'm an art major and I want to see where they display their artwork. And as you learn that, you can start customizing your visits and making sure you see what's important to you, and you can compare, again, the facilities that you might be using. If you're on your way to an engineering major or a science major, you might want to see their labs and their computer equipment and that kind of thing. If you're an artist or a writer, you might want to see the areas for those types of majors. So that's the visit plan. So I encourage families to pull out their calendars, especially, again, if you have a junior right now, you need to pull out your calendar for work and pull out the calendar for school and start comparing notes and saying, all right, which days looking forward is the student and parents available, and maybe block those off. So if the student has spring break or teacher conferences, you may want to pick those days and say, well, those are visit days. And then mom and dad schedule time off from work on those days. Now, you may not even know exactly how you're going to use that day yet. Just make sure you kind of protect it so that when it comes, you're ready to go. And then start looking at colleges. So another important thing to realize about visits is most colleges encourage visits and they have systems. So you just go to their website and you can find information on visits. Or you can call them up and just say, hey, we're interested in visits. How does it work? Do we need to sign up? Some colleges have things like, well, every weekday at 10 o'clock, we have a tour. So whoever's here gets a tour. Other colleges say it's by appointment. In addition to that, a lot of colleges also offer open houses and other events that are geared towards prospective students. So they may have an open house that lands on a Saturday. So you could choose to visit a school on a Saturday during their open house when normally you'd want to do it during the week so you can actually talk to people. But on this particular Saturday, they've got faculty that are, on campus there to help. They've got tours lined up. They've got a lot of good information available on a Saturday where normally you would typically want to visit during the week. So if you can find those things, and so you have colleges you're interested in, look at their calendars, talk to them, and find out when and if they offer special days for, and sometimes it might be a career day. Some colleges will have a healthcare day where they'll have their nursing and physical therapy staff on hand. And people that are interested in those specific majors can get a lot of great information. Or engineering day for an engineering school where they have a lot of faculty and staff available on that day. And they have a lot of presentations where you can learn very specific information, and you don't have to use a vacation day in order to take part in that. So again, your visit plan would be questions like, do you want to take advantage of local resources, even if they aren't necessarily the schools you want to attend? I've had a lot of parents tell me, well, my son or daughter is just not interested in the local school, primarily because it's a local school, and they want to spread their wings, they want to get out of town, and that's fine, but you could still use that local school as a test visit, as a way to kind of get your feet wet. Another important strategy I encourage parents is to do some local visits first to kind of get your feet wet before you make that major road trip. If you're buying plane tickets and flying across the country and you're going to visit 2 or 3 schools, let's say it's in California and you're from the East Coast, if you're going to make that kind of road trip, it shouldn't be the first time you're ever on a college campus is during that trip. Because what may happen then is after you do 5 or 6 more visits, you're going to say, our first try at the visits wasn't very good. We didn't do the right things. Now we need to go back to California and do it over. Well, that, doesn't sound so good if it's a major endeavor. So you're much better off to do a couple quick local visits, get some practice in, and then if you say, further down the road, the local visits we started with, we didn't do very well, let's do them over. It's not nearly as big of a deal to reschedule and do it all over again. Now, your visit plan would tie into your test plan and other things. So as you're visiting, you can learn what it might take as far as scores, etc., to be accepted at particular colleges. And your visit plan is also an opportunity to start getting an inkling of what it may actually cost to attend those colleges. So you may or may not know, and again, if you plug into the resources here on our website, you can get a lot more information. But in general, you don't necessarily pay the sticker price of a college. So if you're at a private school and the sticker price is $55,000 for all in, that scares a lot of people away. But the reality is that a lot of these schools, maybe you wouldn't pay $55,000, maybe you'd pay $35,000 after scholarships and other aid. Now, some families would say, well, that's great. If I can do it for $35,000 instead of $55,000, I'm happy. Of course, other families would say, well, $35,000 is still too much. So we're going to have to find an alternative. Maybe there's a private school out there that will do it for $20,000 or $10,000. But part of the visit plan would be to start learning about the prices of the schools, what it's going to take to be admitted, what kind of scholarships they offer, and kind of learning the pieces of the puzzle. And it's a learning process for a lot of families. You're going to work through it one step at a time, and you're going to learn the first layer of information about how it works generally, collect your questions, get your information, and then go to the next layer. So that's your visit plan. So again, just getting an idea of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And again, ideally, you want to visit a school while they're in session during the school year. Summers aren't as great. If you have to do it that way, you have to. But the ideal visit is during the week while classes are in session, so that there's a lot of faculty and staff available if you wanted to meet with them. You can see what it looks like when the school's in full swing, especially some schools that are a little bit more commuter, where on a lot of times on weekends, it's very quiet at a particular college, whereas during the week it might be a little busier, again, depending on the colleges you're looking at. All right, so that's the test plan and the visit plan. Next, I want to talk about the scholarship plan. And a lot of you immediately say, well, scholarships, of course, everybody's going to pursue scholarships. And I would agree that everybody wants scholarships, and everybody would obviously say, yes, let's get scholarships. But once you're to that point, I would say, well, what's the next step? How are you going to find scholarships? How are you going to pursue scholarships? Because you need to have a plan. What I see is a lot of families talk about scholarships, but in the end, only a few families pursue and win scholarships because it takes a lot of work and effort, and it's a learning curve again. So if you're interested in pursuing scholarships, and you probably should be, it's time to really get into it and figure that out. So I offered the scholarship guide for busy parents. Now this guide is 4 quick videos. You can watch the videos, learn about scholarships, and then determine how much effort you want to put into scholarships. Because I think for many families, the right answer is we need to pursue scholarships. We need to chase a lot of scholarships. We might need to do 20 or 30 or 40 scholarship applications. And if that's your family, that's going to be a lot of work. Mom and dad hopefully will be involved. The student will be involved. and it's going to take a lot of time and effort, and you're going to have to build that into your calendar throughout your junior and senior year. On the other end of the spectrum, I've had a lot of people talk about scholarships and then not do them. In other words, they get busy. They realize as they roll into the senior year that it's time to pursue scholarships, and they're running behind, and the student is busy applying to college and busy with prom and busy with all the other things that are going on during the senior year, and scholarships never quite get done. So I've had families who have looked into it and said, you know what, scholarships just aren't for us. They made a conscious decision to say, yes, there's lots of scholarships out there, but we don't feel like we qualify for that many, and we're just not going to put the time and effort into scholarships. We have more important things to pursue, or we have better avenues to go down, and we're not going to pursue outside scholarships. We're only going to pursue scholarships from the colleges we're applying to, as an example. And then finally, the right answer for many families is somewhere in the middle. You're not going to do 40 or 50. You're not going to do 0. You're going to do 3 or 5 or some relatively small, manageable number of scholarships, because those are the ones you have a good shot at and they make sense for you. So if you want to learn more about the scholarship plan, again, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/scholarship is where we have information on that guide. You can give us your email and sign up, and we will put you on the newsletter and send you that scholarship guide as well. And then finally, we have the financial plan around college. So how are you going to pay for college? This is the last one. Now, this is an ongoing process as well. So this isn't something you sit down for a couple hours and you figure out. It's something that you need to start in your junior year, because as you learn more, you're going to revise the plan. As you visit expensive schools, you're going to say, well, geez, can we afford expensive schools? Let's plug in the numbers and see how that looks. What about state schools? Can we go to state schools? Will they cost more or less than the expensive schools we're looking at? And will we qualify for aid at these schools? And what is our net price of college actually going to be? So some families I've seen where their net cost is, between a number of colleges, is, say, one college is $12,000, the next college is $15,000, and the last college is $18,000. In other families I've seen, one college is $45,000, one college is $30,000, and one college is $57,000, and they have to decide among those colleges. Now, hopefully, you go in with your eyes open, and what you don't want to happen is to get to the end of the process and realize that all the colleges you're considering are going to be very expensive, and you have no choice but to choose an expensive college. And that's where, if you work hard in your junior year and early senior year, you can have a much better understanding of what you're signing up for. So the types of things you need to start working on for your financial side of college is, will you qualify for need-based aid? That's a big question for a lot of families. Will we qualify? And the answer is a challenge. It's not an automatic yes or no. It really depends on the number of students you have, the income and assets that your family has, and a number of other factors. Things like divorce and owning a business and other things can have a pretty dramatic effect as well. So the first step, and again, if you go to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/EFC, we've got a calculator there, and there's a number of videos there that explain the basics of how it's calculated, the basics of what is available through need-based aid from the federal government, and a number of other videos there, divorce planning, and a few other things. That a lot of great information around, will you qualify for need-based aid, and how does need-based aid work? But that's one area you need to work in. Another area is, how much are you going to pay for school? Are you going to pay for all of it as parents? Are you going to pay a portion and split it with your students? Are you going to pay a small amount? What can you afford? And will that actually work? I've had many parents say, well, my son or daughter's going to have to get a whole bunch of loans to pay for college because we're not willing to help. And in a lot of cases, the student cannot borrow enough money to actually make that type of plan work, especially at more expensive schools, where typically a student can only borrow $5,500 in their own name, maybe a little bit more depending on the need of the family. But a typical student is not going to be able to borrow $20,000 or $30,000 without mom and dad co-signing or mom and dad being the bank. So they could borrow $20,000 from mom and dad, or they could borrow $20,000 from the bank with mom and dad co-signing, but they're not going to be able to borrow that straight up by themselves. So figuring out how much you're willing to pay. Another area to work on is, what do you have to work with? In other words, do you have some college savings set aside? And what about cash flow? Do you have an extra $500 a month, $1,000 a month to put towards college. For a lot of families, maybe certain expenses are going to roll off as your student goes off to college. And like private high school would be an example. Some families are paying for a private high school. And they say, well, we're used to paying, $10,000 a year for high school. Now we can redirect that $10,000 towards college. Other families, again, maybe you're going to tighten the belt and come up with cash flow by reducing vacations, or perhaps you're going to increase cash flow by increasing the amount of work you're able to do. Or sometimes I see one of the spouses going back full time as the kids are growing up, where they used to be working part-time. So what are you willing to do, and what do you have to work with to help pay for college? Are you going to consider loans? We've already mentioned that. So some families really like loans and want loans, but I have a number of families that I've run into that are very opposed to loans. They hear the stories of the kids graduating in debt and how they struggle to get on their feet. And, for some families, as much as they don't want loans, in the end, they're going to be part of the puzzle because they need to be. So working through that. And then finally, I guess I wanted to talk briefly about how you're going to learn more. Okay, so we've talked about 4 key areas, and as you're working through these key areas, that's just the start. What I tell people is college planning, as you're rolling into it, is a lot like buying a new car, finding a job for your student, and planning a big family vacation all rolled into one. So if you think about the time and effort it takes to buy a car and plan a vacation, and then think about the commitment it takes from a student in order for them to find summer work, let's say, all of that is kind of combined in the college process. So a typical family is going to spend, days and days researching colleges, days and days visiting colleges. Mom and dad are going to spend time working through the finances and understanding how financial aid works and that type of thing. So how are you going to facilitate that? Are you going to continue to listen to podcasts like this one? Are you going to find some books and read books about the subject? Are you going to hire a professional? Obviously, one of the things that I do is I work with families in my office, helping them figure out how to plan and pay for college. And I feel my advantage is I give them a great big head start. So I save them time and effort on the basics and teach them the basics, and then have them focus on stuff that they need to focus on, talking about what their goals are. I've sent many families home and said, well, is college more important than some of your other goals? Because right now you cannot afford everything you're doing. Either college is important enough that we're going to take money from other areas, or it's not. And there's, unfortunately, no other way. Or you're going to increase your income to cover college if you want to keep everything as is. So many families need to kind of really think about how to tighten the belt and that type of thing. And having someone that coaches them through that will save them a lot of time and money. Now, granted, people that help on the college front will charge you fees, but in a lot of cases, they're well worth it because of the money that you save, the clarity that you get, and how quickly you get up to speed. It's no different than hiring a plumber to solve your plumbing problem. If I have a leaky faucet or a plugged drain or whatever it might be, I may mess with it for 15 minutes and say, you know what, this is beyond my abilities. I'm going to just bring in the professional, because I could watch videos or read a book about plumbing and go back and forth to the hardware store 5 or 6 times. And in the end, I could solve it. But after wasting a whole Saturday, I would much rather just pay the plumber the $150 or whatever he's going to charge. And of course, he's going to come in. He's going to know exactly what to do. He's going to knock it out in 15 minutes and make me feel like, well, wow, I could have done that. But the reality is I couldn't have done it because I don't know what I don't know. It would have taken me hours and hours. But now, if the next time that problem comes along, I know how to do it and I can solve it quickly. But we won't have that problem. We'll have a different problem. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Those are the 4 key areas again. And kind of to reiterate, we need a test plan. And I would encourage you to listen to podcasts on the test planning. They'll be available in the show notes. But Lauren Gaggiano is our test prep expert, and I've interviewed her a couple times, and she's got a lot of great information out there. We've got the scholarship plan, and again, figuring out what types of scholarships you're interested in and how you're going to pursue them and how you're going to budget the time and effort for that. The visit plan, again, coordinating that with your student, something that parents and students typically do together. Is it going to be one or both parents, and how are you going to make that all come together? And then finally, the financial side of college. And again, I covered a couple of quick questions. You're just going to have to delve into it. There's really, unfortunately, no other way than to start working at it and studying it, paying attention. Again, if I were you, I would plug into the rest of the podcasts here and listen in on some of the key episodes. But those are the 4 areas you should start with if you have a junior. Now, if you happen to have a senior and you're listening to this, I'm sure you gathered some great information and you can kind of go through the checklist and say, are these things done? And if you happen to have a sophomore, the test plan, the scholarship plan, the visit plan are all a little bit premature for a fall of your sophomore year. Just know that they're coming. But you certainly can get started at any time on your financial side of college. Whether you have a freshman, sophomore, junior, it's probably not too soon to start understanding saving and investing, whether or not you could save more, whether or not you're saving it properly, figuring out if you're going to qualify for aid and what types of aid, understanding whether or not you're interested in loans, and kind of building a family budget around college and saying, well, if I'm going to spend $20,000 a year times 4 years times 3 kids, where's that money going to come from? And if that doesn't seem reasonable, what are we going to do instead? And kind of jumping into it and trying to figure it all out. So that can happen at any level. But the planning for the scholarships, testing, visits are all very much need to get worked on during the junior year. All right, so I'll get off my soapbox. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to give our office a call. Our phone number and information is on our website. And I look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.